All right, to start, we're going to take off our 5 19mm lug nuts. Remove the wheel. So as you can tell, this axle nut is just completely destroyed by rust and corrosion. I'm going to spray it down with some penetrating oil. When you have an axle nut that looks like this, and the axle, as you can tell, is severely rotted as well, you're going to need to replace the axle and the nut. 100% you need to do that. The threads in there are going to be garbage, and you're not going to get a good lock on it. So we're just going to try to hammer on our 32mm socket and see if we can get this nut off of here. Looks like we got pretty lucky. The nut came off. Next, we're going to want to disconnect the little hooky-doos here. Get some here, there. Come right up this way. This should come out of here. And then you can see these little pitons right there. That's where the connector actually is on the back side. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stick my screwdriver up in there. And I'm going to try to pry those out. And then I'll show you what it looks like. There we go. So we have our connector. This is our ABS wire, part of the wheel bearing. You're going to push up on this red tab so that it unlocks. That's as far up as it goes, by the way. Squeeze this, and then separate the two pieces. Double check to make sure you don't have any corrosion. This looks good. Pull this out of the way. Next, we're going to remove this outer tie rod end nut using a 21mm socket. All right, so we've got that broken free. So next we're going to remove our caliper bracket bolts. We're going to use our 21mm. I'm just going to leave that one in a few threads for now. To this upper one. That's what our bolt looks like. We'll remove this one as well. Set both of those aside. Now we're going to take our caliper and we're going to set this aside. To do that, you need to make sure you hang it on something. Something as simple as a nice metal rod or a coat hanger. And I'll just put it up on that upper control arm so I'm not putting a tug on our flex hose. Next, we're just going to remove our rotor. So I'm just going to spray a little bit of penetrant in here, in between the bearing and the axle itself. Now it's going to be time to push the axle through the bearing. It's very important that you go right in the center. That way you don't damage the threads if you're not replacing the axle. Okay, so we know that axle's moving, we can move along. So I'm going to use my 21mm socket, swivel and extension and all that. All right, you can see it smoking, so you know it's very hot. I'm not going to touch it. All right, so we're just going to start that nut back on, just a few threads here, just like that. Now we're going to take our hammer, we're going to bonk right here and try to break this free. You can tell that it broke free. Let's get this nut off of there. Lift this and draw this down. At this point, you can push your axle. So we're going to remove the lower ball joint nut using a 21mm socket. There it is. I'm just going to start it back on a few threads here while holding the knuckle so it can't go too far. I'm going to give this a couple bonks with my hammer and try to get it to break free so it comes down and rests against this nut. There it is. Lift up, take off your nut, bring it down, slide your knuckle off the vehicle. So we tied the axle up and out of the way. Now I'm just going to apply a little bit of penetrant and try to get it along where the ball joint goes into the lower control arm. We're going to let this hang out for a little bit, do its job, and we'll continue. Okay, so to get our pressed bearing out of our lower control arm, you can either use an air chisel, try to push it out of there. It may or may not work. Generally speaking, you're going to want to use a ball joint press. To get this ball joint press on here, you're not going to be able to get it because the axle, you need to get a nice straight shot. So what we're going to do is we're going to pop the axle out of the differential, and we're going to just kind of push it off to the side, and that way there it'll give us a clear shot to be able to use our ball joint press. So we have our collection receptacle on the ground, and that's just going to make sure that any fluid that might come out of the differential will be recycled properly. I'm going to use a nice long pry bar. I'm going to go between the differential and the axle and just try to pry that axle right out of the differential. So we've got this so it's ready to start coming out a little further. That feels pretty good. We don't need to go too far. We just want to get it to the point that we can draw this off to the side. And of course you want to be careful for any pinch points on the boot. Everything's rounded off pretty well, but in your scenario it may or may not be a little sharper than this. I'm just going to pull this off to the side, tie it that way. So we're just going to use our ball joint cup here with our little adapter. We're going to go right along this, making sure that we're using the cup on the control arm itself and not prying up against the ball joint. We need to be able to drive the ball joint down and through this, and of course out of the lower control arm. Let's see if this works. So as you saw, it just broke free from the lower control arm, so this is a good thing. It's starting to work its way out. Get our tool out of the way. There's our ball joint. Let's grab the new one. So we're going to take a second and look at our new ball joint. You're going to notice that the new boot that comes on it comes all the way up to the lip that we're going to be using to press this ball joint into the lower control arm. So what we need to do is use a small pocket screwdriver, go right in between the boot and the ball joint itself, and just carefully pry. And we just want to remove that boot, and we're going to reuse this in a minute. So when we go to press in our new ball joint, this is going to come all the way up like this, and then you want to have this lip right here coming up and over the top so you can get your snap ring on there. To do that, you need to make sure that you're not using something flat right here because this won't be able to press up. You need something that the ball joint can fit in a little bit, and it'll be able to go up in. So we'll put that, and then this, and then put that on there, and then we'll just go ahead and start pressing it in. All right, so I have this all stacked up. Let's start pressing this in. If you're watching right along here, you're going to notice that the ball joint's going to come up to the control arm. Perfect. Release pressure. Remove all of our adapters. We have our snap ring that came with our ball joint. I'm going to use some snap ring pliers. They just have little tips on them. Go right into the holes there. Give them a squeeze. It separates the snap ring. Slide it right over the ball joint. There we are. So we're just going to use a pry bar and a hammer, or you can use a punch and a hammer, and just kind of go around this and make sure it's completely seated all the way around. So we have our boot. Just slide it over the ball joint. Start it on one side, then use some pliers and just help it along the rest. Let's get our axle down off of here. I'm just going to take the axle, slide it back into the differential. Beautiful. All right, so we're going to take our knuckle. I'm going to take my washer and my locking nut. We're going to slide the knuckle up over the axle and then bring it up so it's coming up over that lower ball joint stud. Take your washer and then your locking nut. Start them on there. So it's time to start buttoning this all up. And what we're going to do is we're going to put it all together, bottom it out, and then once it's all together, we're going to torque everything down. I'm going to use my 22mm socket on this nut and bottom it out. Okay, lift this up, slide it in, push it down, take your locking nut. We're going to bottom that out. Use your 21 with the little swivel here. So you'll notice as I'm trying to tighten, it's just spinning the stud here. That's fairly common. It's not really something that you have to worry about. I'll show you why. We're going to take a nice long pry bar. I'm going to go in between one of these coils and up against the upper control arm. I'm going to bring it down. So this is applying pressure, trying to condense this together, squishing the stud inside the knuckle, and hopefully I'll be able to blast this right up and in. We've got our rotor. Put that up on there. Take one of your lug nuts and just bottom it out so it holds the rotor from moving around too much. All right, so we're just going to turn our knuckle, grab our caliper, and our caliper mounting bolts. We're going to remount this. So we're going to use our 21 millimeter and bottom these out. So now we're going to torque down these caliper bracket bolts to 100 foot-pounds. So now we're just going to take our outer tie rod end, slide it into the hole in the knuckle, grab your locking nut, start that on there. Okay, so we have the same issues we had before. I'm just going to apply a little bit of leverage and see if we can get this on. Bottom that out. We're going to tighten up the outer tie rod end nut to 30 foot-pounds. So we're going to torque down this upper ball joint nut to 30 foot-pounds. We'll tighten up this lower ball joint nut to 40 foot-pounds. So we're going to take our ABS wire and we're going to start connecting it back onto this brake hose here, and then up along here, right there, and then back here, we'll get it plugged in. Put it into the little clippy doos. Comes up this way. This is going to go right here. Right. Get our little clip. Clip it in. Give it a tug. If it comes back apart and you know you didn't clip it in far enough, you want to make sure you hear a good click. Give it a tug. Once it's definitely in, lock it down. Don't forget that red tab. After you're done that, push it all up inside the fender here. Push those through. Take your axle nut. We got ourselves a nice brand new one here. Super excited. We're just going to bottom it out, and then we're going to torque it down to manufacturer's specifications. So let's torque this down to 100 foot-pounds. That's torqued. All right, just get this off of here. We're going to grab our wheel, get it back up on here, start our lug nuts on, and then we'll bottom them out and torque them down to manufacturer specifications. We're going to torque these down to 100 foot-pounds. All right, now down the road you go to the alignment shop.